Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to finally do my July wrap up. So I know that we're already 1 week into August, but to be honest, I've been quite tired since I came back from Italy, as I'm only now getting to the books that I read in July. So I've read quite a few books in July, so I hopefully won't be going on too long about them, but I'm going to start off with the 3 audiobooks that I listened to. So first up, I listened to the audiobook of The Mothers by Brit Bennett, which is a book following 3 young people as they sort of a coming of age story of these 3 people. Nadia, who is a woman going off to college after the summer has passed, has this affair or this relationship with Luke, who is sort of an ex-star athlete, and she ends up being pregnant and having an abortion. And so a lot of the book sort of follows on after the abortion and what kind of consequences it has for both of the characters separately. And there's also another character introduced later called Aubrey, who is sort of entangled into both of their lives. She has a relationship with Luke, and she's friends with Nadia, and she becomes entangled into their messy past. So this book is, one of the things that I loved about the way that it's told is that there are small sections of the book that is basically the elder women in the community narrating their perspective on the characters' lives. So you have this sort of group narration, sometimes having these interludes in the rest of the book. And I loved the way that you could see the community's reaction to these 3 characters, the way that they were perceiving what was happening and judging the choices that the Luke, Nadia, and Aubrey is making. And I just found this a very compelling book to read. I found the 3 characters really compelling to follow. The character development of this and how these 3 characters navigate their lives. So I found this a really good fiction novel, and I'm interested to see what Brit Bennett writes next. The next book that I listened to was Circe by Madeleine Miller. So obviously I have a physical copy, and that's because I listened to the audiobook while I was away in Italy, and I loved it so much that I immediately bought a physical copy to have. This is probably one of my favorite books of the year, but it is a Greek mythology retelling of Circe, who is the daughter of the sun god Helios. So it's following Circe both in growing up and being always sort of bullied by her family and being looked down upon by everyone around her, and then when she discovers that she has witch powers or magic, she is exiled to an island, and this book follows her life on that island as well. I was going into this quite blind, aside from what I knew of Greek mythology through Mythos by Stephen Fry. I think it definitely helped in having that book fairly fresh in my mind still, so that I could recognize a lot of the characters that come into this book. But what I loved about Madeleine Miller's Circe is that it is fully realized and feels complete and like a novel, but it still has the sort of the sensory feeling of Greek myth. I don't really know how to explain it. It is sort of dramatic in a lot of ways, that as Greek mythology tends to be. Everyone is stabbing each other in their backs, and a lot of the characters are really egoistical. Everyone is having affairs with everyone. It's the drama of Greek mythology is still completely here, but the book as a whole still feels like it has a strong narrative pull to it. Madeleine Miller just marries those 2 things together perfectly in this book, and all of the characters feel completely fully realized and true. I loved Cersei, I loved Penelope, I loved seeing all of the women in particular in this book, but I just loved it, and I am now so excited to explore more of the characters introduced in this book, and I'm also planning to read the Odyssey soon. But yeah, I love this, and I would definitely recommend it, both as a text in itself, but also as an audiobook. The audiobook narrator was fantastic, so there's that. And the last audiobook that I listened to in July was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, obviously narrated by Stephen Fry, because I love Stephen Fry as a narrator. He is my favorite male narrator. But I really enjoyed rereading this book. I think it is one of my favorites, if not the favorite, in the Harry Potter series. It was my first time reading it in the English, because I'd read the Swedish translations of all of the Harry Potter books prior. A lot of the ingredients in this book I love. I love that Hagrid is a teacher in this one. I love the whole storyline with Sirius Black being the central character in it, and that Voldemort isn't actually an important character in this particular novel. I love Hermione using the time turner, and I found it interesting that some things stood out to me more this time. For example, I hadn't realized that Ron is very perceptive about Hermione's using the time turner and bending the time. He's noticing that something is off with her immediately, and that was really surprised me, because I don't really think of Ron as a perceptive character. I love everything about Harry's background story, in particular his parents' background story. So there's a lot of things in this that I love. It was a lot of fun, and I will be looking forward to continue on rereading the series through the English audiobooks. So the first two books that I finished before I went to Italy were both nonfiction books. We have The Soul of an Octopus by Montgomery, which is a natural history of the octopus told through personal meetings with specific octopuses, and also talking about sort of general things, some of the characteristics that they have, some of the amazing abilities that they have. One of the things that I found so fascinating is their ability to camouflage themselves, so changing the appearance of themselves completely, like patterns, colors, textures, everything like that. I find it completely amazing, and I loved learning about them in particular in relation to intelligence and in consciousness, which is definitely a central theme to this book. I think overall this was a really good nature writing book, written with a lot of passion for the animal. It's not there's a lot of anecdotes in this book, so it's not only a natural history book, it's sort of mixing in the personal and memoir aspects as well. So I think it was a really good introduction to the animal itself, and I really liked Montgomery as a writer as well, so definitely a really good nature book. The second one I read before I went to Italy was Joan Didion's Blue Nights. So this is a book that she wrote about her daughters passing away, and she is both writing about, sort of mourning through the act of writing, writing about the daughter adopting her childhood, growing up, and all of those things, looking back in time. A lot of this book is also talking about her present and her aging, feeling disconnected with the way that people are judging you based on how you look on the outside, and how they are perceiving your age, and your ability to take care of yourself and things like that, in contrast with how you're feeling on the inside, how you are thinking about yourself, that disconnect. And I think there's sections in the parts that she writes about herself that I found were filled with true insight, and especially in relation to aging and dependence. One of the things that I don't really like about Didion, both in this book and in the her first essay collection that I read, I think last year, she's part of this very specific generation and a specific setting, so sort of California's in the 60s and 70s, and with that, it's sort of a secret club that They have the same kind of brands on their clothes. They go to the same hotels. They travel to the same places and everything. So they're part of this particular group. It doesn't feel like she's really making it easy for the reader to become part of that group and to understand where she's coming from. She doesn't really welcome you into the books. I feel like there's a distance in her writing, but in the few sections that she's more vulnerable, I really liked. So I'm not sure how I feel about Didion as a writer. At the moment, I just don't feel the deep connection that I know a lot of people feel with her books. Then I had 3 fiction books that I read in Italy, and first we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, which again is a really hyped up book on BookTube and everywhere else on the bookish internet. So it's following a protagonist who after finishing college, she just wants to sleep for a year. In order to accomplish this, she takes a lot of medication. She starts seeing a therapist that gives her medication very freely, and she starts self-medicating to be able to sleep off an entire year. And so this book just follows that year. Obviously she has a lot of mental health problems, and she is an orphan. Both of her parents has died while she was away in college. And she doesn't really have any other meaningful connections. She has one friend. They don't really care that deeply about each other, but she's the only person really that is a significant part of her day-to-day. But she doesn't really have any deep connections with anyone, and so it's a lot about her disconnect with the world and how she's trying to sort of find her way again. But the writing style of this is really sort of it's not really raw, but vulgar and rough around the edges, and that isn't usually my taste. It feels very millennial in sort of the similar vein of Normal People by Sally Rooney and The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Both of those 2 books I didn't like so much, but this one I really loved. I don't really know what it was about this book in particular that really worked for me, but for some reason this one hit home while the other 2 mentioned just didn't. One of the things that I liked about this book and the protagonist is that she's really a beautiful person. She's constantly commenting on that fact, and she says that she doesn't care about her looks. She knows that she's beautiful, and she knows that she will be able to get anything she wants because she doesn't really have any problems with money because she has such a big inheritance. She says that she doesn't care about how she looks, and yet she is constantly commenting on the fact that she's still looking good. The appearance of it is still fine, even though she is so medicated that she's blacking out. Even though she's so out of it, she is still looking good. On the outside, she seems fairly put together, and that's all that. It feels like she's using this as a measuring stick in how off the rails she is. As long as she's still looking fairly put together, she's not off the rails. It feels like she's using it as a way to measure her stableness or her mentality in some way, which I found really interesting. The next fiction book I have to talk about is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. So I read this for Jane Austen July. This was one of the last Jane Austen novels that I'd yet to read, and now I only have Persuasion left. So this book follows a family of 3 sisters. One of them marries rich, one of them sort of marries a naval officer, and she's sort of the bad sheep in the family. She has a lot of children, and she's really poor. So the richer sister decides to adopt one of the children of the poor sister, and that child is Fanny Price. The novel opens with Fanny Price moving into this new house with a new family, basically, with the rich sister and her 2 daughters and 2 sons. Fanny isn't really happy with moving to a new place because she is leaving everything that she knows behind. Eventually she becomes quite familiar with this new place, and in particular very close to one of her cousins, Edmund. And this book follows all of these characters, in particular Fanny Price, obviously, but all of the people in this house and them having, making new friends with another family and all of those things. The thing about this book is that Fanny Price is a very quiet and reserved heroine. She is part of the book from the start because she her moving to this new house sets off the book. But while she's still constantly in the room, she barely says anything. She's a very insignificant character, at least for the first 200 pages. She's still there and she's watching and observing people, making judgments about them, suffering from other characters' choices and behaviors, but she isn't filled with agency like most of Jane Austen's other heroines. And then eventually she grows into her own, she grows in confidence over the course of the book. More of the family realize the strengths in Fanny. She's able to listen to people, to be a good observer, and to make intelligent conclusions about people's character. She is someone who is very true. Aside from Fanny as a character herself, I feel like there's something about this book in general that feels quite different to the other Austen novels. So it feels more modern in the kind of commentary that it has. I feel like I can't go into any depth about this in this wrap-up because it's going to be too long, so I will try to write a review of this. And when I've done so, I will be linking it in the description. But it is a really good Austen book, and I know that it's definitely one of the less popular or lesser known Austen books. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't got into this yet. Then I read a fiction book that I didn't like very much, and that is Swimming Home by Deborah Levy. So this was my first Deborah Levy. I've been interested in her as a writer for a long time. This book follows two families who spend a summer in a mansion in a French city, and there's already a young girl there who doesn't have anywhere else to go, so the family decides to invite her in to stay with them for a few days until she can get a hotel room. So this book follows the interactions between this girl and the two families, and in particular one of the husbands of the families, his relationship with this girl. I think the only thing I really liked about this book was the ending. I think there is definitely a lot of mental health related commentary in this book, but I just didn't feel like it went in any new directions. There wasn't anything in this book that I really connected with. I didn't think that the writing was anything special. It felt kind of pointless, and I don't know, this was just not working for me. And I'm not gonna be rushing out to read more Deborah Levy, but if you've read this book and you've read others of her and like them more, then feel free to recommend me some of her other ones. I think I'm still kind of interested in reading some of her nonfiction, but this was not for me, so yeah. Then we have 3 nonfiction books that I also read in Italy, and so first we have Word by Word by Kory Stomper, which is a book about the making of a dictionary. Kory Stomper works for Merriam-Webster, and so she talks about the making of a dictionary through her own personal experiences. This is kind of technical in parts. It is sort of the history of the dictionary in general, and some of the to sort of illustrate some of the things that she's talking about, she gives examples from her own job and from Merriam-Webster in particular. So she will be talking about things like what a dictionary is for, the purpose of it, and how there's so many misconceptions about that in the public. The fact that a dictionary is supposed to reflect the contemporary meaning of words, so it isn't supposed to lecture you on the correct way to use a word, but it's supposed to be useful in the setting, the context that it is published in. She talks about the making of an entry for a word and how long it can take to get a good definition. She talks about using or the inclusion of bad words or cuss words and things like that. There's a lot of sort of small things that I really enjoyed learning about, and it's sort of nerdy in that sense. It really takes a deep dive into linguistics and in particular the English language. It is kind of technical in aspects, in parts, but if you're interested in the subject matter, then I think you will find a lot of things that you will probably learn a lot of things. Then the last two books that I read in terms of nonfiction in Italy was the Easternmost House by Juliet Blaxland, which is a book about the author living on the edge. So she's living in a house close to a cliff, and due to coastal erosion, the house is soon to be gone. This book is sort of a chronicling of living in this house and knowing that it won't be there for long. And she talks about a lot of other things in connection with that as well, and talking especially about rural life. So there's that, and Wilding by Isabella Tree, which is Isabella Tree talking about the rewilding of Knep, which is really big, a really big area of land that she and her husband is sort of responsible for. Her talking about this rewilding progress over several years, and also talking about our perceptions about wildness, about nature and what we expect to see in the nature around us, and a lot of other things in relation to attitudes and conservation, the control of nature and things like that. So both of these books I will be talking about in a separate video for my Wainwright reviews. So I think I will probably talk about these two together because both of them touch on farming in particular. So that video will be coming very soon. So those are all of the books that I read in July. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. So if you read any of these books, I would love to know what you thought of them. If you're interested in reading any of them, I would also love to know that. I hope you've had a fantastic July and a good start to your August, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.